So one thing I wanted to explore with these videos was that there are many proven ways to build safe pedestrian and cycling infrastructure that already exist today. Too often we try to go it alone and make incremental changes when we could just copy what's being done right now in other places, and then we could improve from there. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we implement pedestrian and cycling facilities around bus stops, and let's keep that in mind. The most basic approach with a simple painted bike lane is just to have the bus stop exist in the bike lane, with the bus either having to stop in or cross the bike lane. Now, as an aside, Toronto has begun to paint these areas with green paint. I do understand the reasoning is to paint any potential areas where there are conflict points, but I'm kind of not sure in this case whose attention is supposed to be drawn to this area. I'm not sure what a cyclist is supposed to do differently since they have the right of way in this case, and bus operators are definitely aware that there's a bike lane there already. So I'm a bit confused. Just maybe let me know in the comments if you have any ideas as to what the kind of logic was here. Anyway, this design is obviously very unsafe since the bus must ensure they see the cyclist as they move over. But what's even more unsafe is that when a cyclist overtakes the bus while at the stop, it can be very easy for the bus operator to miss the cyclist, particularly if they don't make the stop correctly and are not parallel with the curb. Basically, the bike ends up in the bus's blind spot, and it makes it very hard to see. Conflict points at an angle like this can be very bad. So, most recent designs in Toronto have improved on this with raised platform for cyclists. This is definitely an improvement, but it's not the most ideal. It basically replaces a dangerous conflict point of buses merging across cyclists with a dangerous and very inconvenient conflict point of cyclists crossing pedestrians who are boarding and alighting the bus. It also encourages pedestrians to wait in the cycle path. In some cases, even this design is made to be more dangerous than it even has to be, like on Roncesvalles, where after most streetcar stops, cyclists are basically dumped into the back of parked cars, forcing them to make quick movements into an active lane of traffic. So, what's the better solution? As seen here in the Netherlands, the bus stop can be placed in a dedicated pedestrian space on the street side of the bike lane, with the cycle path going behind the stop. Pedestrians can easily cross the cycle path when clear and wait for the bus in an area where they have no conflicts and can easily be visible to the bus operator. The most interesting thing about this stop in specifically is that it was not always like this. Back in 2008, we can see that the design is very similar to bus stop crossings currently being implemented in Toronto. Even after a redesign in 2009 where the design was improved upon, pedestrians were only given a pencil-thin waiting area, something that currently would never meet Ontario's accessibility guidelines. It was only after another redesign in 2018 that the final design emerges. The only thing that was removed was the vehicle turning lane. And even then, that could have still been introduced closer to the intersection if it was still needed. Obviously, this design does require a bit more space, but in today's example, we will see how this is easily accommodated in most places. So my main point with this is that we could create incremental improvements, just like the Dutch did, until we eventually get there. Or we could save ourselves a decade and use the blueprint provided by the Dutch to implement this today. Okay, so the intersection that we'll be looking at today is going to be at Sherbourne Street and Shooter Street. And the reason I'm going to look at this intersection is because I think the bike lanes and bus stops along Sherbourne Street are a good example of what we're talking about. So here's the street in question. Sherbourne Street going north and south has semi-elevated bike lanes. They basically have a curb that is mountable if needed, but is somewhat separate. And then Shooter Street, I believe it typically had bike lanes, just painted bike lanes, but more recently they've upgraded them to have some level of separation. So I'm going to dive into the intersection, but you can see right here that there's no protection or other than some bike boxes really nothing given at the intersection itself. So I'm going to dive in here, and because some of these bike lanes have been recently upgraded, you might notice that they might look a little bit different depending on what view I use, because it depends on what image Google Maps decides to show at any given time. So we can see here along Sherbourne Street what I was talking about. They are curb separated, but the curb is mountable. They have added flexi posts to prevent that, but it is possible to mount them. Here's a good example, the bus stop, and this is why I've chosen this intersection. You can see this bus stop has that design that we were looking at, where people boarding the bus would board directly from the bike lane, basically, and alight from the bus stop. And so you can see, even in this example, there's two people. They're not in the bike lane, and they'd probably be fine, but they're kind of hanging out right next to it. And you can see you have that kind of issue that we talked about. So I'll go forward just into the intersection so we can take a look at things. And we can see there is a bus stop to the north as well. I'm going to leave that out of the design just because it's a bit further north. And I think it's simpler just to deal with one example here for what we're doing. We can see along Shooter Street, at least in this example, it doesn't look like there's protected bike lanes or just bike lanes, but neither here nor there. I think we can still do this. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. There are these bike boxes to help with turning, and so those do help a bit. It gives cyclists clear areas where they can wait when doing a two-stage crossing, but it's not the same as protection, and it doesn't necessarily help with the same level of safety. So given that, where I wanted to start with, because we're not going to be able to see this in a top-down view, I wanted to look a little bit at the kind of cross-section at this, and this is the best view that we can get, but I kind of wanted to start with the argument that I think is going to come up where maybe we don't have enough space, and that's definitely a concern with this design in some cases, but I want to show that we do clearly have enough space here. And so I'm just going to move over. Okay, and now that we have this up, I just wanted to show kind of a cross section of what we have, and we can see that we have this lane right here, which is our bike lane. And then we have a cross section here that in the bus stop, the main function that this is serving is a waiting area. So pedestrians generally have to move through here. So we have already enough room for cyclists, a waiting area, and pedestrians. So this new design that we're going to do, where the bike lane goes behind the bus stop, we already have enough space for it. And so if you have a bus shelter with this design, you almost certainly have enough space for this, because you've already allocated part of the sidewalk to a bus shelter, which means you could move that onto its own dedicated area in front of the bike lane. So I did want to show that we have enough space here to do this already. There's no additional space we needed. In some cases that might be a problem, and so you might have to look at different things you can do. Here, if we needed extra space, there's actually some extra space already in between the bike lane itself and this edge line, so I'm wondering if we could use that. In some cases, if there's turning lanes or additional lanes we could remove or narrow, there's a lot of different tools we can use to potentially get more space for this design. All right, so I also wanted to look at this view. This is just a little bit down the street, and if we zoom in, we can see further down the street, it's the same width that we have of the street here, but part of the street is being used as a loading area. I'm not 100% sure what the purpose is, since there's no standing and no stopping in this area, so I wasn't 100% sure what the purpose was, but there is like a loading area here a bit further down the street. And you can see there's plenty of space to have a loading area, a bike lane, and pedestrian facilities for people to walk by. So this is basically the same sidewalk width that we have at the intersection, but there's clearly enough space here. So I just wanted to show these two examples because it can look like it's very narrow and it can look like there's not necessarily enough space, but I think these examples clearly show that there is space. Okay, so let's jump into the intersection, and unfortunately we don't have the best view of things here. So I'm gonna have to start as we did other times by just drawing things out. I'll start by drawing out the curbs. The reasons I wanted to do that little experiment first was because it does show where those different elements are on the street, and it's very actually hard to see in this example because the trees are covering. So while I do this, hopefully I've already kind of shown you that there is space for this design. So you can see the bus stop is right down here in this area. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna move this space here as the bus loading area. We'll have a space in between for the cycling track and a space here for the sidewalk for people moving by. And I will, like I said, it might be hard to see, but we've already kind of shown that there is enough space for this. And we'll end up with the same thing at the end. All right, so you can see what I've done here at the bottom right of the screen. I have my red area, which I'm designating as the, it is a pedestrian area, but it's the bus loading area. And then you have the green, which is the cycle path, and then the black, which is the sidewalk. So you can see there's space for all three. This is kind of how it would work. Now, the one maybe thing that you might want to adjust with this design is you do want enough space between the bus stop and the intersection. So we're talking like this space right here, so that when people exit the cycle lane into the intersection, so they come out of the bus stop, there's enough visibility so that if a car is waiting here, they can easily see the cyclist. But mostly we'll fix that by intersection design, by doing a regular intersection design, just like we did last video. And so now that we've done that with the bus facilities, we can go on and do our intersection design as normal. So I'll start by extending the bike facilities out and creating a turning radius around the sidewalk. Okay, and from here we can add our curbs. All right, and from there we can add our connecting cycle lanes and where those will go. Okay, and you can see similar to last time, they've kind of moved into the location approximately where the old zebra crossing was. So we're gonna move the pedestrian crossing back just behind it. And there you pretty much have the intersection done. And now you can see we have our proper facilities for loading the bus. People can cross, and we could even add, this is a bit one level of detail deeper than I would normally go, but you can even add that you would have pedestrian crossings, right? Across the cycle path, like that. At the same as the last time, you can add small different features on. I think one feature that really complements this well, like we showed last time, are small curbs here. And potentially you could even extend those out here if you have space for them. And that really just forces people to go around and make a more direct 90-degree turn around the intersection. So that's basically it. And it's, you can see it's a fairly simple concept. There's definitely different design elements you have to keep in mind given what's in the area. Visibility is one big thing. You want to make sure that wherever you put the bus stop, that if there's any conflict points with cars, that they're visible, because the bus stop will mask the cyclist when you're putting them back this far. But there's different designs to this. I can say that when you look at a lot of other places that do this design, often they will put the bus stops at mid-block. So rather than at the intersection, they'll be in between two intersections. And there's some advantages to that. You likely have more road space that you can do that with. The disadvantage is someone coming from a different street will have to walk further to get to the bus stop. So there's upsides and downsides to doing things different ways. But you can see that this design is definitely achievable, and probably in most places you could do something like this. So I think we'll wrap things up for today. Hit all those little buttons, the YouTube buttons at the bottom, if you like this content and you'd like to see more. I'll see you on the next video, where I'm thinking I'm going to explore maybe a bit of a more complex version of something like this. So thank you.